So welcome to the panel, Increasing Accessibility Through Collaboration on Open Source Projects. We're very excited to be here, and thanks to CSUN for accepting our presentation, and really glad to see so many people interested in open source and in collaboration. So the first thing we're going to do is go around and introduce ourselves. This will be a panel discussion, so you'll get to meet everyone here on the panel, and we'll have just a few introductory slides and then some discussion questions for the panel. I'd like to hold audience questions to the end, if that's, I think that'll make it go a little smoother. So starting with myself, my name's Caroline Boyden. I'm a web developer and accessibility analyst at UC Berkeley. I've been working in the accessibility field since 2004, 2005, and I am a contributor to an open source project, Drupal, the content management system, and its ecosystem. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to pass around this collar mic. Hopefully there will not be any crunches and crackles, but we'll start over here with you, Mike.
Hi, I'm Mike Gifford. I'm the president of Open Concept Consulting. We're a web development shop that focuses on Drupal, and I'm a Drupal core accessibility maintainer. So I've been working for the last 8 years trying to improve Drupal core's accessibility.
Hi, I'm Lucy Greco, and I work at UC Berkeley, and I am a contributor to open source in many different ways, which we're here to learn about today. And I have worked in assistive technology probably since about 1985. Exactly.
A noob.
Hi everybody, I'm Mark Zahi. I work for Mozilla. I am the accessibility QA engineer and an evangelist. I've been working in the accessibility field since probably 1995, 96-ish. I've been with Mozilla for 7 years and have been contributing to various open source projects, including obviously Firefox and Friends since all the early 2000s, basically.
Hello, my name is Mick Curran, and I'm an executive director of NV Access Limited and a co-lead developer of the NVDA project, which I started back in 2006. We're still going strong. Apart from, obviously, NVDA is an open source project itself, but over the years I've also contributed to Firefox, OpenOffice, and the iAccessible Tools Network.
Okay, I'll just grab that mic for you. What's going on? So just a brief background on what open source software is and why we want you guys to be contributing to it. So open source software means that the source code is available for people to look at and use. It's often distributed free of charge, although not necessarily. There's the difference between free as in freedom and free as in beer. Open source software means the source code is available. It can be modified and distributed, and this is controlled by the license that it's released with. So it's released to the public, and members of the public can take the software, use it, modify it, and contribute back to the upstream project. It is often created collaboratively, so the project will have a way to accept contributions from people who are interested in it, and it often has an associated community, whether that's a developer community, a user community, or people doing meetups, etc. You've heard some examples of open source software from our panelists here. Others that you might have heard of are the Linux operating system, and things like the Bootstrap web framework are also open source. So why contribute to open source? One reason is to give back to a project that you use. If you benefit from an open source project, you may feel motivated to support it and to improve it. And I would like to make a special pitch for anyone here who is an employer or works for an employer to pay your employees to contribute back to the projects that you use. This is a great way, it is a great way not only to support the project, but also to support your developers, to increase their skills, and to increase their profile in the community. To learn some, What?
And to improve your own website.
And to improve your own website, absolutely. Another reason is to learn something new. Open source projects give you the opportunity to try out new languages, new frameworks, etc. To make it work better for you, if you are using an open source project and you find that it's deficient in some way, then contributing is a great way to get those bug fixes or those features that are most important to you into the product. To enhance your resume, if anyone is a software developer, you may be asked when you go for an interview, what's your GitHub profile? We would like to look you up. And so contributing to open source projects is a way to get your name out there and to have your code be accessible in a way that other people can see what you're capable of. To collaborate with experts, you'll be, in some cases, working with the styles and standards and what they expect in their projects. And finally, to become the subject of the narrative. And what I mean by that is, when you become a contributor, you're not a person for whom things are done or to whom things are done. You become one of the people who's doing the doing. And that is a very empowering thing to be able to do, to give yourselves agency within the products that you use. So how many people here are not programmers? Okay, so I see about 15 to 20 hands. And so I guess I can assume that maybe 20 or 25 people here are programmers. Well, you can still contribute to open source projects, even if you're not a programmer. And I'm going to go through some ways here. Using the product itself. If you're using the product, you're also testing the product, and you'll have insight into how it works and how it doesn't work. Teach people to use it. If there are workarounds or shortcuts that you have become aware of, you can share that knowledge with other people and improve their experience of the project. You can file bug reports. Most open source projects will have a bug tracker, Bugzilla or GitHub issues or something, where you can, if you discover a problem or you have a feature request, you submit it, and then it becomes public, and other people who are interested can say, hey, yes, I want that too, or I have an idea how to fix this. So it makes it obvious to the maintainers of the project what the users of it want to do with it. You can request new features that help accessibility. Similar to filing a bug report, you can say, hey, it would be really great if this modal dialog could be operable with the keyboard, and that is a feature that will increase accessibility. You can attend a meetup. This is part of becoming the user community, and you'll be participating, meeting people, sharing knowledge. You can write documentation. Documentation is something that is sometimes an afterthought, particularly in a project that people aren't being directly paid to do. So if you can contribute documentation, then that will really improve the product and the lives of the people who are using it. You can provide translations. If software is to be used internationally, it's very helpful if it's available in languages other than in English. So if you can translate the user interface, provide those translations back to the maintainers, then that project can be used in many different languages. You can test patches or updates. This is getting a little more into you need to know how to code in order to do this, but you can download a nightly build and see if it fixes what it's supposed to fix. You can apply a patch and see if it fixes what it's supposed to fix. And you can test the latest bleeding edge and then do some of these other things, file bug reports, etc. And finally, if you are a programmer, then you can actually contribute code to the project. So I'd like to start off our panel discussion. We have 4 discussion questions that I'm going to go through, and I'm going to take off this mic and pass it among our panel. The first question is, what makes open source software good for accessibility and vice versa? How does it compare to proprietary software? And for this question, we're going to start with Lucy, and then I guess we'll go Mike and then down the line. So Lucy, here's the microphone.
Hello again. So to answer this question really briefly, because they've only given us 40 minutes today, The biggest benefit to open source software is exactly the reasons and the ways people can contribute. As Carolyn said, we can become part of the solution in open source projects, which means if we're part of the solution, we're adding accessibility to those projects tiny bit by tiny bit. It's not a giant corporation making a product, not listening to us, the users, when they are creating that product. Open source projects, in general, listen to the community, and if we contribute back to them, can become the most accessible products out there.
Okay, I want to hand it over to Mike. Oh.
Sorry, everyone.
That's all right.
I think that one of the big advantages to open source web accessibility is that the web is moving too quickly and it's too big a challenge. That a lot of times people think that they have enough developers and enough of an IT infrastructure to take on the challenge of web accessibility, and usually they don't. Often a shop may have the ability to go off and build something that's accessible, but to maintain that over time, it takes a long effort. It takes a different kind of model to go out and maintain projects to see that they continue to be accessible and are able to keep up with the changing demands of users and of technology vendors, whether it's the browsers or the assistive technology. It's a huge challenge. And also you have people who have so many diverse needs. You're not just dealing with the blind community, but also dealing with the various kinds of visual impairments and mobility impairments and learning impairments. It's such a huge need that we need to have a lot of people involved in crowdsourcing the best solutions that work for everyone.
Okay, Marco.
Yeah, one other advantage that I see, also from personal experience, is that collaborating between projects, for example, between Firefox and the NVDA team, or also the Orca team on Linux, is that we can really work closely together, and because everything is open source, everybody can look at what the other party is doing, and that therefore provides the best solution out there. And there's a reason for why, for example, so many people recommend Firefox and NVDA, for example, when working with Google Docs, because we've done real great effort and collaboration to provide the best web accessibility that we can possibly deliver. So that's I don't think that would be possible if either of us was proprietary.
So,
Sorry.
Yeah, I think for me, it really is about sharing knowledge, and not just between close collaborators, but in general. Now because NVDA is open source, it means that people who are testing their website or software with NVDA, if they realize something doesn't work or whatever, and they have a bit of programming knowledge, they can, if they need to, dip into the NVDA code and see how exactly we choose to do certain things. None of it's all locked up in proprietary ways. So it's very clear how, say, a name or a role or a state or whatever is being generated, and then you can go and ensure that your software is doing the right thing. But also, I think it's just a great example really of open source is just very useful as a learning tool.
does anyone on the panel want to follow up to respond to anything that someone else has said on the panel so far? All right, let's move on to the next discussion question. Question 2 is, how did you get started as an open source contributor, and what was your experience like? And for this question, we'll start with Marco.
I have a very personal connection to contributing to open source because that's what got me my current job at Mozilla. I started as a contributor. I was recuperating from an illness, and I had lots of time on my hands, and I was just looking at what Firefox the state was, and using JAWS, and also just learning about NVDA, and so I looked at what was there and what was working and what was not, and started finding bugs. I just started finding bugs and providing steps to reproduce certain stuff, and hanging out on the IRC channel. And that's when Aaron Leventhal, who was working at IBM at that time and contributing the accessibility code to Mozilla, to the Mozilla project, he basically said, hey, I like the reports that you're writing. Everything went from there. And so this, it was gratifying to see stuff that I had reported be fixed in a couple of 90s later and actually working, or even like, okay, here's a patch. Can you build Firefox yourself and see if it fixes things? And so I basically set up my first build environment for Firefox on Windows and then applied a patch and compiled and saw if it worked. And that's really gratifying. And that's how I really also understood what the value of open source was. I had contributed to other open source stuff before, but that was all more on a not so direct impact level. But this was my first real experience, and that's how I got started. So I didn't even write code yet. I started writing code later, but I was actually just finding bugs and finding issues and reporting issues, and that's how I got started there, using my experience from my previous job at a big screen reader vendor that I was working at before.
All right. So Mick, I'm going to hand you the microphone.
Okay, well, I got started in open source, I suppose, around maybe 10 years ago, maybe a little bit, maybe 12 years ago. I actually started in the JAWS scripting arena, and yeah, this is open source, or at least we chose to make our scripts open source. That way, some people know. But yeah, that's when we started. Me and James Tate, my colleague in Access, we started developing JAWS scripts for various audio editors and music editors and things like that. But then a few years later, I was just sitting down one day bored and decided to write a screen reader because I couldn't do it. And so that's really where I got really serious about open source. And I guess from my years before of sort of using Linux and things like that, I already appreciated how important open source was. And so that was a very easy decision for me to make, that I would make NVDA open source. And part of the reason is because at the end of the day, you as a person, as a programmer, don't know everything. And you do need help from others. And there are many people in the community with different skills that they can bring to the table in regards, so with NVDA, we have many contributors in the community. I mean, counting our code contributors and translation and documentation contributors, we have at least, I'd say now, over 110 people contributing to NVDA. Now, about 20 of those are probably serious code contributions. And it's really great to see. And I mean, it also allows, certainly in the case of NVDA, it allows other blind people in the community to have something to do, something that they can put their energy towards. I mean, the employment rate for blind people, unemployment rate is 75%, I think, on average in the world, which is a terrible rate. But and I used to see a lot of blind people at home twiddling their fingers on the computer, just playing games or something. But now they can be contributing, making a meaningful contribution to their own lives by developing their own software that they will need and will rely on, but also are able to contribute to the world and help others. I mean, NVDA, especially in developing countries, is helping thousands who can't afford the commercial screen readers, and I believe that open source is really the only way of doing it.
All right, thanks, Mick. All right, Mike, I'll hand it over to you.
Excellent. So I got started with open source by quite early in probably the early 90s, and was introduced to open source software and the ideas behind that. And in fact, my business wouldn't have been around if I hadn't gotten considerable support from an early open source advocate in 98, 99 when I was starting off and looking at beginning my business. But the first open source project that I actually contributed to wasn't Drupal. It was a content management system called Backend that I went off and inherited, and it was an abandoned project that was quite useful for in its time, but it was something that ultimately the maintainer didn't have the resources to maintain, and so I became the maintainer of that project and did that for 3 or 4 years before deciding that it was too much work to maintain my own content management system, and decided that Drupal was a better path forward for me and my clients. That was one of the reasons that I went off and made that jump. But through the whole process, I've learned considerably. Everything that it's been a learning process the entire way along.
So I had to think about this one when we first came up with it, and I realized that I've probably been using open source here and there throughout my entire life, everywhere, but I think my most significant time to realize the benefits of open source was working on a learning management system that the UC was using at that time, Sakai, still exists today and is still open source, and realizing that, hey, I can actually look at this particular piece of software, and I can write up a report and send this report off to somebody, and they can change it. And it doesn't affect just me, and it doesn't just affect my university, but I think at that point in time, there was over 100 universities worldwide using Sakai. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of students around the world that are affected by the changes we were making. And by just me running tests on that particular system and making sure that that system was as successful as we could make it. And to me, that was the big eye opener. So to this day, when I have a choice, I choose open source because I know that my choice affects other people in the end, ultimately.
So I just want to call a little bit of attention to one thing that Marco said, that when you started on Mozilla and Firefox, you started by filing bugs, not by writing code. And that is, so if you are not a programmer, that's an entryway into contributing. And if you start filing bugs, then maybe you're testing patches to bugs, and that is a way that if you want to, you can move yourself into writing code for the project. And so the third question is that open source projects can have very different reputations as far as openness to newcomers. Do you have any advice for new contributors to help their first encounters go well? And before I hand this over to Mick, I want to do a quick poll. How many people here have contributed to an open source project? Okay, that's a lot. That looks like about 2/3 of the room, and there are about 40, 45 of us. So can I just see a quick show of hands if you have not contributed to an open source product? And has anyone who has not contributed partly because they feel nervous about stepping in and exposing themselves to whatever attitudes the maintainers might have? Anyone? Okay, I see a few, 3, 4 hands on that. Okay, so I'm going to turn this over to Mick here to start talking about advice for new contributors.
So yeah, we love to see new contributors in open source software because the more people you have, the better the software can be. But I think there's a few little rules and stuff people can apply so that they don't get yelled at or anything. Because you have to understand that when you're, just firstly coming from the point of view of the maintainer of a project, you've got hundreds of people all around you doing some fine work, but when you're asked the same question or whatever over and over again, or you have newcomers who haven't bothered to read any documentation or anything, it takes a lot of your time to answer those questions. So really the first thing I'd say is when you think you might want to contribute, firstly look at all the information that is already provided by that project. So familiarize yourself with the website. It probably will contain documentation, whether it be user documentation or developer documentation. At least familiarize yourself with that. Of course, when you're thinking about filing a bug, it's very important to search the bug tracker first to see if your bug has already been filed, because in all likelihood it probably has. So have a look. The third thing is when you are filing a bug, it's very important to provide as much information as possible, because we're not mind readers, and a lot of things that you assume we might know, we don't. So it's very important to provide steps to reproduce, because every system is different, and many occasions I open a bug and I read a bug and I quickly glance, they say, you know, this doesn't work. I try it and it works. You know, so clearly I'm not, you know, not doing the steps that they were doing. So it's very important that you provide exactly how you were doing it, what operating system you were on, what keys you pressed, even if it seems really obvious. Please write it down. Also, please join the community as soon as you can. Don't work in isolation. So join any email list or whatever that exists for the project, and talk about your ideas on there as well, because it's possible that a few of you may have the same idea, so you might be able to collaborate together on it. Also, it's very important before you start a big piece of work in open source that you might want to contribute, it's important to perhaps ask to see whether it may be accepted by the project, because you don't want to get halfway through something and say, yeah, look, I did this, and then the project won't accept it because it wasn't, you know, that's not the way the project was going. And I'm sad to say that I've had to do this on a few occasions with university students, where a university student has come to me or their you know, their lecturer or whatever, and said, oh, my student has done this work. How, you know, when will it be integrated into MBA? And so I have to say, well, actually, you didn't talk to us about it in the first place, and we don't really have any need for that, or that's wrong, or something like that. Whereas if they'd come to us a long time beforehand, we could have worked out the most efficient or best project that they could have been to help the project. Yeah, that's all I'll say.
Okay, so Marco, I'll hand this around to the other side.
Okay, what else is there to add? In our case, I can only echo what Vic said. Like, you know, join the community, get a feel for what the, you know, what the tone is, and even if you, for example, are not an English native speaker, it is not a shame to not get every vocabulary or grammar right. If you feel like you want to contribute anyway and stuff, do it. It's not, you know, nobody like Mozilla and also MBA and others we are so diverse in terms of, you know, different language and cultural backgrounds that it is only natural that anybody can come in and contribute. And like I said, every report, every bug report, or even every question of an unclear feature is helping. For example, I get a lot of questions on Twitter on how certain stuff is used. Some stuff I already know, and then can you know, link to the bugs that are already there, or other resources. And in other cases, there are actually, you know, new bugs being discovered, especially if you still already use the bleeding edge, like the 90 builds of Firefox or whatever, and you find something that doesn't work. I can immediately check, okay, this got broken, or this is stuff that's new, which is lacking some accessibility feature which it should have. For example, we just recently finally made the new search UI fully accessible in Firefox, and I got a couple of reports on that, and I could say, hey, yeah, we're working on this. I'm aware of the problems, and it took some time to get it right, but now it's done. So, yeah, get a feel. If you know somebody in the project, like if you follow me on Twitter and you find something in Firefox that's not working the way you think it should, always, you know, drop me a mention, or, you know, send me an email. I've got all the information on my blog, how to contact me and stuff. So that's yeah, basically the way. And I'll always, you know, be, obviously that should be obvious, but, you know, always be respectful. And I always say I want to treat the others like I want to be treated. Like, so you know, if you're friendly and just, you know, ask or whatever, and, you know, a polite tone and stuff is always going to, you know, give a much more positive reaction than just blurting in and said, this doesn't work, this is bullshit. You know?
All right.
Okay, let's send it
All right,
to
thanks. Okay, Lucy.
So it's probably easier for them to come up with the answer to this, since they're both, you know, that side of the community, and they behave very nicely to the contributors. I don't think I've met a project as nice as Mozilla and as,
We paid her to say that.
and they showed up, that's how they paid me. But the one thing I can say is, think about what you're doing when you do it. And like Marco said, don't put in a report, don't put in a comment that can be at all hostile or rude, or people do this all the time, and it really ruins the environment out there. It makes it uncomfortable for people who are succeeding. It makes it uncomfortable for people who are new. So when you are creating, your first contribution to an open source project, be it you're filing a bug or you're reporting something, or don't forget to praise what that project is doing, and tell them what you're doing with that project. That's a contribution too, because it's really important for people to know that the project has value to you and to others. Be nice about it. Be very nice, be clear, be concise, and be as detailed as you can. It's nice to hear this product is great. It's better to hear that this product helped me do this, and that this product changed my life. That, detail, and be polite.
I'm going to disagree with all of you guys. No, that's not right. I think that just to build on what was being said, I think that there is an element of trying to start small as well. Like, asking questions is really useful, and even if you're not sure if this is a problem or not. Not everyone is an accessibility expert. Not everyone is an expert in programming or in CSS or JavaScript. Remember that there's so much that you can learn. If you're not sure if this does seem to be a blockage and you need to go out and find it out, make the question. And certainly, it's worthwhile to go out and to read the documentation and to make sure that you're familiar with the process for submitting issue queues, and searching the issue queues is also very important. But so many people, the barrier is so high for initial participation that they just don't. And what I would argue is that people find ways to begin the process of regularly interacting with open source communities so that it's not a big deal to go off and post an issue. Like, I've got accounts on Chrome and Firefox, so it's easy for me to go off and to post issues in their bug trackers so that I can, if I find an issue, I can go off and report it and push for changes that I want to see in other open source projects. But if it's not something that's easy to do, if it's a big process, if you feel that you have to sign on and become an expert in all of the documentation that leads up to it, then you're not going to go off and take that step to do that most of the time. Start small, make it part of a regular routine, make sure that it's something you can do and fit into your life and your work patterns on a regular basis, so that it can be an advantage to you. So whether it's learning more about accessibility or learning more about web development, or learning more about usability, there's elements that you can use the open source community to go up and to learn more about the issue and ask questions, and you don't have to provide the answers. You can work with the community to find an answer that works for you and works for others as well.
Okay, I just did a time check and we have about 8 minutes left. So our final question is, what can open source leaders do to reduce barriers to contributing? I think some of the barriers are obvious. In some cases, the tools themselves that you use to contribute are not accessible. Other barriers are language barriers, time barriers, things like that. So we're going to start with Mike on that question.
Thank you. I think that one of the first elements for leaders is just thinking about humility and trying to go up and to encourage others to participate. That having a leadership that is able to go up and to realize that they don't have all the answers and they need to go up and have participation of others is really important. I also like to say that there's a lot that can be said to take those newbies and to identify them and find ways to see that there are ways to encourage and nurture the newbies in your open source community so that they ask that first question and get a response. And this is something that we're not particularly good at Drupal, but certainly see that there's an element where if we were better at supporting those people who got up the courage to go and ask that first question, if we were able to see them get some resolution to that that first question, it becomes addictive. Once you sort of get something into core, you want to get the next thing into core. You want to be involved in part of that process. It becomes part of your identity. If you post a question and never get a response back, you're going to forget about it. But if you get it in and you have some acceptance, then it'll become a big part of your life.
I'm going to specifically speak to the part about this about increasing accessibility. The one most valuable thing you can do is encourage people with disabilities to use your product and then get feedback from those people. Force them to contribute, damn it. Because ultimately, we don't ever know if a product is accessible unless the person with a disability is using it. And the more people with disabilities using your products and contributing back and feeding back to you, the more accessible your product will be.
Yeah, to echo what Mike said, the same about being friendly and polite and creating a good atmosphere obviously also goes for the project maintainers or people working in the project full-time like myself and others. I'm always very happy and very grateful for reports or questions, even though it may not be an issue or may not actually be something that's solvable right now or that's on the radar for the immediate future. For example, I've had to tell a lot of people over the past couple of years that I'm sorry that Firefox doesn't work as well on the Mac as it should. And I'm grateful for every question I get in that direction because it helps me to push the issue forward internally. I'd say there's interest there. There are people there that want that stuff, and I'm always grateful for every question I get because it helps me to see what the needs are and what the users of the browser want, and I can use that to make a case for certain things inside Mozilla because we're also a non-profit, so we also have to be careful with our resources, so we can't go full steam into everything that maybe a multi-billion-dollar company can do. Mozilla isn't that big, so and that goes for I think most open source projects. Every question asked shows the need or the shortcoming or just provides any ability to learn more about who's using your stuff, and that's very valuable. And we should, as maintainers or as core contributors, definitely appreciate that too.
Yeah, just two things to add. One, try and make it as easy as possible for a contributor to set up the development environment or whatever they need to contribute to your project. So, for example, both MVDA and Mozilla have quite good build environments where you only have to do one or two things and you get everything, including all dependencies and everything already there, and you can just go ahead and start to compile or contribute or whatever. The other one is that open source leaders need to, I guess, give new contributors, a chance, at least one chance, to see how, because it's very easy. You wake up one morning, someone asks some silly thing, or there's some code which won't work or whatever, and it's very easy to just reflex reaction and just say that's crap, and but you're going to turn them away straight away. So it's really important to review their code, tell them, nicely, what's wrong and how they could fix it, or give them some ideas to fix it, and work with them, because in many cases you'll find some wonderful talent in the community if you work with them and nurture them.
So that is the end of our prepared questions. I'm just going to show this resource slide quickly. I posted these slides up and also our list of open source resources. The resources were too big to fit on one slide. So the URL for the slides is bit.ly, that's bit.ly/CSUN-open-source. And the link for the list of resources is bit.ly/open-source-resources. So now I would like to open it up to,
Can you contribute more links to that later?
yes,
Do you
yes.
email us?
Yes, if
links
you would
and
like to
links?
email us links, we will add them to the list. And we have a little bit of time for questions. So I see a question in the front row. I'll repeat it into the mic. We'll go ahead and in the front row left side.
Hello. I have a question about forking, maybe more for the person from Drupal. So things can be fixed in a module or but often you find that there are copies of it running around on the internet on websites like myawesomedrupaltemplates.com, and it can get fixed in the open source, but maybe not in all the clones everywhere. So is there something to be done about it, or is it?
So the question is about forking, which is basically cloning off a copy of a project and then working on it. So if something is fixed in the core canonical project, it's not fixed in all the projects that have forked it. So is your question is, can anything be done about that?
Yeah, then bad copies get reused and reused, although there is a better copy of it.
Okay, Mike, you want to take that?
So forking is, as for the longest time, being very bad. The worst thing you could do in an open source project was to fork it and splinter a small community and make it smaller. Then GitHub came along, and that sort of shattered that idea, because the whole concept of GitLab, which is now hosting most open source projects, but forking is how things are done. It's just an inherent part of contributing it. You need to fork the code first, and then you go off and do a pull request to go up and get the information back. So that whole structure has changed the paradigm. And there's also other elements where, like within Drupal right now, there was quite a lot of uproar in the last year, because in the process of trying to get Drupal 8 out, there was a group of developers who decided to go off and to create a CMS called Backdrop that's sort of between Drupal 7 and Drupal 8, to sort of combine some elements from Drupal 8, but not all of them, into something that basically runs with Drupal 7 and do some enhancements there. And there was a lot of concern that fork of core was going to be something that would really be negative for the community and something that would really divide Drupal. And it hasn't really. It certainly was, there's a lot of division at first, but I think it's something that can make us stronger, that forks can be used to go up and to have more iterative, more innovation, and to inspire people to do more. But it depends on how it's done. And in terms of people who are forking off and doing other things, it really depends on the community that's around them, and trying to go off and to make sure that there's communication and a commitment to taking those best ideas and bringing them forward. And with some forks, especially on things like GitHub, you can't do anything with them. You can't go off and sort of push those changes back out to the smaller projects.
What about back into the big project? How do we convince people to pull it back in?
Yeah. So I think we have time for one more question before we have to wrap up. Is there another question someone
You
would
know how
ask?
you could make people feel better about contributing back in? We're actually talking about this on my project, is highlighting contributors on your docs website, giving people praise for contributing back to the project. So that's one strategy we're doing.
So the comment was that one way to get more people to contribute was to highlight their contributions in your documentation and on your project pages. Yes, I see.
If I could, just real quick, one way that newbies can contribute that's really valuable is documentation. Because if you didn't understand something and then you got it explained and you got it to where you understood it, you have a perspective that's shared by other people, and if you can document that and contribute it to the documentation, it can be a big help.
Okay, yeah, so the comment was that one great way for newbies to contribute is to documentation, because in the process of learning how to use it, they have a perspective on it that they can then share with other people to help them learn how to use it.
And t-shirts.
And t-shirts, yes, yes, the swag is always recommended. So we are unfortunately out of time. Thanks everyone for coming, and this is our contact information. Thank you.
Sorry if I can jump up and down to press the video.
No problem.
I hope it's-
I thought, of course,